Hello, thank you. Your slide is showing well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, welcome to the National Korean Studies Seminar, and it's my pleasure to give you a bit of an introduction to the Bell of Friendship, more commonly known as the Korean Friendship Bell, located here in Los Angeles and San Pedro. Uh, and it is a tremendous monument. I wish you could have all been there in person to uh, witness it and actually get to ring the bell. And hopefully one day you will get to do that once we get past this COVID situation. But welcome, and it's my pleasure. So in the 20 minutes given, I would like to talk about the purpose and the historical background of the Korean Friendship Bell and the embedded culture and symbolism inside this bell, and historical events and connections. Dr. Jung Kim has really very well capsulated the Korean history post the Three Kingdom period. And many of those events are actually tied and embedded into this bell. And you get to hear a little bit about the hidden significance and meaning that may not be so obvious simply by searching it on Wikipedia or just the seminar type of environment, but I'll take you for a little inside look at the design of this bell. And we will talk about, most importantly, the legacy and the shared values of friendship and alliance between our two nations, and I'll open up for any questions and answers. It's a tight schedule, so I'm going to be speaking a little bit fast, but please feel free to post any questions into the chat section, and we will get to this eventually towards the end. So without further ado, let's get to the bell. So here's the view of the Korean Friendship Bell at a sunset. The Korean Friendship Bell is actually located in a scenic bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's on the south end of the San Pedro Peninsula, and to the east is a Port of Los Angeles, and to the north is the shoreline transforming from Torrance to Redondo Beach, all the way up to Venice and Santa Monica. And here is the bell. It is one of the biggest bells in the world. It remained the largest bell in the world until about 2000, when the Koreans actually forged another bell with an additional meter in height and added another ton in weight. And it's located in Imjingak near the DMZ. And they call it the Bell of Peace. But this is the original bell that was given in 1976. And one of the notable thing about this is this large log that's hanging from the outside is how the bell is rung. It's suspended with chain, and you strike it from the outside. So the Korean Friendship Bell, or the Bell of Friendship, was the Korea's bicentennial gift to the people of the United States from the people of South Korea. And bicentennial obviously refers to the America's bicentennial of independence. So it was in 1976. This particular bell was modeled after the divine bell of King Seongdeok of unified Shilla period in 771 AD. And as Professor Jung Kim's earlier lecture talked about how they were quite literally at the height of their cultural achievement, both in science, technology, culture, and metallurgy. And to the world, it was one of the wonders that someone was able to cast a bell this large. And like I said, it was the largest bell in the world in 1976. It's 12 feet in height and 7.5 feet in diameter. And I will tell you a little bit later about why the bell needed to be forged in such a size. The bell weighs about 18 tons, and it's made mostly of bronze alloy. And when we say alloy, because it also contains gold, silver, and nickel, as well as iron. And at that time, it cost about $500,000 to cast, and 9 bell masters, 9 surviving bell masters had to be called in to put a bell this large into action. And they brought in about 12,000 laborers to help cast this bell. The pavilion was actually constructed on site over 10 months by 30 artisans who flew over from Korea. And many of the stonemasons actually hewn the stone right on the spot. And they actually stayed at the barracks at the Fort MacArthur, and an additional cost of about $450,000 at that time. So if we were to try to do that, you would have to adjust for inflation. So it was quite a task. The bell was first rung on the 4th of July in 1976. The original plan was to have it installed and ring it for the bicentennial in the US, but because they had to make it in Korea over winter time, when the first bell was forged and struck, it developed a crack and became unusable. So they had to forge it again. So finally, they were able to get it done, and they rung it on the 4th of July in Busan before they put it on a boat. And then finally, it was brought into the US and installed and rung for the first time officially on October 3rd of 1976. And I will have a couple of videos on these historic ringings. And it's another record here in Los Angeles. Once the bell arrived, the people were so taken by this bell, they immediately designated it as Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument, number 187, within the first couple of years. So here's a little background on this video. This is, the narration is in Korean, so I'm gonna lower the volume a little bit, but it is actually the time when the bell was struck for the first time in Busan before it was placed on a boat.
미국 독립 200주년 기념 선물로 보내기 위해 만들어진 우정의 종 타종식입니다. 미국에 보내기 앞서 종소리를 들어보기 위해 마련된 타종식에서 김성진 문화공보부 장관과 스나이더 주한 미국 대사가 총을 울렸습니다. 이 우정의 종은 오는 9월에 미국 로스앤젤레스의 종각에 봉안됩니다.
So here's the first time the bell was rung in the US.
여기는 미국의 로스앤젤레스입니다. 미국 독립 200주년을 경축하기 위해 우리 정부가 제작해서 보낸 우정의 종이 우리 동포가 많이 사는 이곳 로스앤젤레스에 세워졌습니다. 우정의 종은 경주 박물관에 있는 봉독사 신종과 규모가 같은 것으로 한미 우호와 세계 평화를 염원해서 만들었으며 로스앤젤레스시 당국은 우정의 종이 세워진 이 일대를 공원으로 꾸밀 계획이라고 밝혔습니다.
So before we move on to the next slide, I'll call your attention to the fact that the bell is actually housed in a pavilion that's decorated mostly in white. There's no coloration or tanchang applied to it yet. And this was actually on purpose, because when the Koreans deliberated on how to present this bell, they said decorating would be too difficult for the Americans to maintain, because it is actually a lot of work. And we found that out through the restoration process. But in 1982, the bell was given a fresh decorations in a traditional Korean tanchang motif to commemorate the centennial of the diplomatic relations between the two nations. So they wanted to commemorate the American bicentennial because by most definitions in modern Korean history, America became Korea's, or at least South Korea's, greatest ally and friend. Because historically, after the diplomatic relationship was established in 1882, and then suffering through the colonial period of 35 years under Japanese colonial government, the Korea's independence movement was housed both in the US by the Korean American expatriates, as well as in temporary government in Shanghai, China. And in fact, most of the fundraising was done in the United States, and many of the Korean American patriots and independence fighters were able to work without hindrance here in the US. And US became a staunch ally in Korea's independence movement in regaining its sovereignty. But it also honors the veterans of the Korean War. As of this lecture, we have confirmed that 36,574 American soldiers died fighting for the people of Korea and its democracy. And there are many who have yet to be accounted for. And the South and North, since the détente movement most recently in April 27th of 2018, had resumed searching for bodies buried in the demilitarized zone in the border between the South and North Korea. And of course, the tensions began to rise last week with North Korea blowing up the liaison office in the South Korea. We're watching with abated breath. So hopefully the tensions will subside and they can resume friendly relations again and work towards unification. And the South Koreans actually specifically refers to the three things that the United States and the people of Korea share. It is their love of freedom and their love of democracy and their aspirations for prosperity. So let's talk a little bit about the embedded culture and symbolism of the bell. We'll talk about the bell and the bell ringing. We'll talk about the roses of Sharon. We'll talk about the 4 pairs of figures that are engraved onto the bell. And I'll have a picture of that a little later. And the bell actually bears 4 pairs of figures. One side is the goddess Liberty, also more recognizable as the Statue of Liberty. And then to the other side is the Korean representation of angel, also known as Hanyo. And their design specifically refers to the fact that it was going to be given to the site located inside the City of Angels. And each of these figures are holding a different symbol. Taeguk, which is more commonly known as Ingyang, which means harmony and eternity. And Mugunghwa is a national flower of Korea, commonly known as Rose of Sharon. One pair, the Sanyo is holding the laurel for victory, and then finally the dove for peace. And the bell is housed in a pavilion that has 12 columns, each referring to the specific zodiac animals, the 12 animals representing the cycle of the season. And specifically, each of these columns refers to a very specific direction. And the bell itself is located inside the pavilion that has a temple-like architecture, which means that it actually has steps that are designed very narrow and tall on purpose, so that those who come up to it and walk away from it will have to use a sideways walk so as to show reverence, that you're never turning your back against the bell. And here's the bell. And this is before restoration, and you can see the bronze patina. And in this particular case, the Sanyo, the Korean angel, is holding a branch of roses of Sharon, which should be in full bloom around now. And then, of course, to the left is the Statue of Liberty, or Goddess Liberty. And I want to call your attention to this particular round hole underneath. It's actually a concave structure, or known as the sound bowl. And at the top is a dragon hole, that actually has a very specific acoustic qualities. So what happens is when you strike the bell, the sound then travels down to the reflector bowl, which then travels up and reverberates, and the higher frequencies then get let out through the yongtong or the blowhole, and then it gets refracted by this lattice work at the top. And these are all very specific designs. Unlike the temple architecture, the Buddhist temples, this is actually a danchang that adorns many of the official government buildings, as symbolized by the animal that represents the throne, the dragon. And the specific design for this motif at the top is that of Rose of Sharon, the national flower of Korea. And here's actually an interesting thing to mention. When we ring this bell, it is actually offered as something of a meditation and also a prayer. In the time period when the first bell, the divine bell of King Seongdeok, was cast in 771 CE, many people were illiterate. And so to them, the action of ringing the bell and using that sound to bring about calm and peace was an act of mercy. And when we ring the bell in 5 different ceremonies throughout the year, we specifically make a point of ringing the bell 33 times. And 33 is a significant number in Korean culture because it means universal or omnipresence. And you can kind of see that in rough geometric representation here. I talked about the 12 columns of the pavilion, but it actually has a square base representing the 4 prime directions of north, south, east, and west. And then it is actually then housed on an octagonal shape around the bell that represents the subdirections within those 4 primary directions. So 4 times 8 is 32. And then we ring it for the 33rd ring so that it comes back to the center, which means that you have completed a full cycle. So each time we ring it for peace, we ring it for harmony, we ring it for unification of Korea, and we wish for just goodwill towards all who hear it in all directions. So I mentioned earlier that the bell was later decorated with Korean danchang to commemorate the centennial of the diplomatic relationship between the 2 countries in 1882. And then it was the World War II, that Professor Jung Kim mentioned earlier, that actually brought about the Korea struggle and the ultimate liberation of Korea from the colonial rule. And then in Korean War, the US was a leading ally along with the 22 other UN forces that defended Korea's freedom. And then in Korea, in turn, returned a favor by participating in Vietnam War to defend democracy in their allied country. And then of course, in modern terms, the modern alliance and partnership as Korea continues to work alongside the US in peacekeeping missions in overseas theaters in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Ernest, I'm so sorry. We're going to have to wrap up in about a minute.
Okay, that's fine. Again, the hidden significance is it's actually a sacred and musical instrument. It contains the hope for a unified Korea by designating a symbol from the Unified Kingdoms period. That we ring it 33 times. And finally, I want to mention that when the site was chosen, they forewent any kind of further discussion once they discovered this particular fort that was chosen is named after General Arthur MacArthur, who is the father to Douglas MacArthur, the leading architect of the Incheon landing that turned the tide in the Korean War. 2 countries share the value of liberty, democracy, and prosperity, and the choices that the South Korea has made after the World War II has made all the difference in that the Korea is now the 12th largest economy in the world, 3rd largest exporter of automobiles, leading IT technology powerhouse, and also cultural export. And none of these would have been possible had South Korea not chosen the liberal democracy model of the United States. And it is one of the only countries that has hosted all 5 global games, World Cup, Summer and Winter Olympics, as well as Asian Games, and achieved both democratization as well as economic development.
Ernest, I'm so sorry. We're going to have to wrap up right here.
Okay.
I know time goes by so fast. Like I said to everyone, the speaker slides are available on the website. The link is in the chat room, so please take a look at that. If you have any questions for Ernest, please feel free to keep messaging in the chat, and then we'll send forward the questions to him. Ernest, I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much. We got to the final slide.
Got it. So thank you so much. How about maybe round of applause for Mr. Ernest Lee. 감사합니다.
Thank you, and have an enjoyable seminar.
Thank you so much.